So what's going to happen now is that we're going to have a series of, let's call them interviews. There are going to be 3 of them, and the main theme, the common thread there is going to be the AfCFTA. And the first one that is going to be moderated right now by Anne-Marie Woolley, who is the CEO of Africa Global Trade Finance. She will be looking at she calls this particular topic straight talking on prospects of free, inclusive African commerce. And I will also give her the opportunity to welcome her panelists. So over to you, Anne-Marie.
Good morning, guys. I'm hoping you're all well. And I think those of you that perhaps know me also probably smile at the title when it says straight talking, because I think I'm probably renowned for that. But first of all, I'd like to ask my panelists here to introduce themselves. So can I start with Shaahien?
Yeah, good morning, everybody. My name is Shaahien Mottiar. I'm with Standard Bank. I look after the trade and working capital portfolio management piece. I've got some history in risk, and I've been dealing trade on the continent with Standard Bank for a number of years now.
Thank you. And Souleymane, who's joining us from virtually from Ecobank.
Thank you very much, and good morning to all. My name is Souleymane, and I actually am responsible for the trade product suite for the Ecobank group. Ecobank, for those of you that do not know, is a Pan-African bank covering 73 countries across the continent, and looking forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. So, as you know, we're discussing the impact of, now I have to get my teeth in to say this correctly, AfCFTA and its impact. So the first question to ask our panelists, and I'm going to direct this to Shaahien first, is what are the important practical considerations in growing intra-Africa trade? Is it as simple as just getting additional pools of trade finance to market participants?
So I think there are a number of interwoven themes that we need to consider. I won't focus so much on the agreement itself as to the underlying drivers of trade on the continent. So it's 55 markets, 2,000 to 3,000 different languages, 41 currencies. Essentially what we're trying to do, and I think the trick here is to remember the ultimate why behind the AfCFTA. I won't say it 3 times fast. And the ultimate why is to grow the lot of the 1.2 billion people on the continent. So some of the challenge we have is, can the demand on the continent be met by supply on the continent? If you're going to move the needle from 15.5% of African trade being intra-Africa trade to 20, 30%, how do we do that on the supply side? Ghulam spoke yesterday about challenge with power. I'll add some color onto that in terms of challenge of infrastructure. Do we have the rail infrastructure or the logistics to be able to move goods from one country to another, right? Of the 54 countries, some are a little bit more advanced than others. There are some interesting examples which I'll speak to in a minute or two, but some of the challenge we face, again touched on by Ghulam yesterday, is around protectionist or nationalist policies, particularly in difficult times, right? Countries tend to close up. So I think in driving intra-Africa trade in the context of AfCFTA, it is about the trade-off between what is foregone now in terms of tariffs, which I don't think are really a big issue, but in terms of investment required now versus growth that comes in later on. I'll do one example and then I'll pause. There's a Zambian company that we know and we deal with that was looking to diversify away from food and beverage into biscuit manufacturing, but didn't have sufficient butter in Zambia. And the trick was how then to source that butter from South Africa or Botswana. And the challenge was those markets were constrained. So very cleverly what this company did was actually look to invest in dairy farms with a sole offtake of the milk and the butter products. So I think key challenge for me around the macros is to summarize the underlying structural factors and how do we meet continental demand with continental supply of goods and services.
Thanks, Shaahien. Souleymane, if I can come to you, where do commercial bank players see opportunities to grow their trade book, through partnerships new or with funding and new structures?
Thank you. First of all, I want to maybe just weigh on the first point, which is really, what are the challenges, etc. But it's very important for us to recognize the efforts and the vision that have actually been epitomized with the AfCFTA, with getting 54 countries to be signing and close to 41 countries having ratified in a very speedy way. So that means that we have the political will, which is critical. Now, it will obviously come with challenges, and for us, we see it obviously as a growth opportunity as commercial banks, and more so as a Pan-African bank. Why? Because obviously AfCFTA is supposed to grow intra-African trade, and by doing so, improve on welfare for Africans and for our constituencies in terms of corporates. So what are the opportunities we see? It's obviously to be capturing this intra-African growth in terms of trade, and how we would do so. We know that in Africa, we have the gist of our businesses are SMEs, close to 90%. We feel that it will be very critical for us to help SMEs, first of all, have access to the markets, both on the national front, but also on the regional or continental front. And that would be done only by obviously improving in terms of capacity. So capacity building will be key, because we all know that close to 80% of SMEs are in the informal sector. So we need to have the right advocacy and help formalize the sector. And once that is done, ensure that they also have the access to those markets. And certainly from a commercial bank point of view, what we can add to the plate, especially from a Pan-African point of view, is to be really helping them foster these additional opportunities. And once we have the contacts, because one of the key areas that is probably the missing link is the ability for an SME sitting in Senegal producing cocoa or producing any merchandise to know that there's a demand for that merchandise or for that good in Zambia. And as a commercial bank and present in all those countries, we can also make sure that we help matchmake. I know that the African Union have the observatory, and we need to basically put together our clients, make sure that they move from contact to contracting, and as a commercial bank will help put those instruments in place in order to help them get the right confidence and trade. So that's an area that I see as a growth opportunity, and certainly we are well positioned to help all the SMEs on that front.
Thank you.
So I'll pause there. Thank you.
Thank you. I guess it's always a challenge, because you've got perhaps farmers growing a particular commodity, and the largest market for them would be to sell them to other international markets, not necessarily other African markets, because they're buying also from a global perspective and aggregating these. So I guess from Shaahien, maybe talk about what do you think we need to do about growing trade finance in this FTCA environment, trying to promote that, because that's one of the challenges as well. I mean, leaving aside the currency issues between the various African countries, it is that scale of those raw materials being perhaps produced in maybe an agri environment, and also though in a metals environment, and the market for that processing, for the quantity, isn't actually on the continent.
So I take a slightly broader view. I think in large part, we can disaggregate the perspective into two potential views. The one is to look at what's happening on the continent today in terms of what is being extracted from the ground, what is being produced, and what is being shipped offshore. And the second part talks to, well, where are we going to be in 20 years, 50 years from now? Now, if I look at the first part, and there's a rather tongue-in-cheek line that says, industrialization is so last century. But essentially, if we look at the first bit and we look at what's happening today, a large part of the beneficiation of those raw materials happens offshore. Okay, but if we try and focus on growing trade finance in that bit, we will be constrained, my view. I think the idea is how do you grow the pie? And you grow the pie by growing the capability on the continent to produce more, to do more, right? There are examples of genuine technology leapfrogging. Tanzania, for example, went from a fixed line penetration rate of 3% of fixed line telephony. They didn't work through it. They just went straight to 97% penetration of mobile telephony. So there's opportunity for leapfrogging. So I think the trick in growing demand starts with development finance. How do you grow the infrastructure, the capability, manufacturing and services on the continent, and then lead into trade finance where you actually have these goods flowing on the continent. Now, some of that involves understanding credit mitigation and how do we extend further credit into new players. Some of it will involve non-bank financial players. Some of it will involve the sovereigns actually having to step in. I think a key learning for me over the last 2 years has been this shift in thinking around efficiency of production, where manufacturers talk about just in time, and actually what it's shifting to is just in case. And it's an opportunity for African manufacturers and African industry to again leapfrog the thinking around how do we understand the demand of our populace today versus where it's likely to be in 20 years, and then how do we feed into that and grow that capacity to actually, and it's not just goods, it's services in health, finance, technology. And in large part, for me, it's before we get to the trade finance piece, there's a little bit of other work to be done up front. Not ignoring the trade finance piece on BAU today, but understanding we are building for future generations.
So, Souleymane, in that context, I guess looking at these SMEs, how do you think we can leverage on their critical mass to close that trade finance gap and boost intra-Africa trade?
Yeah, for us, the view is really, as I mentioned before, to improve capacity and expand their market access. It's very critical for an SME to be able to access even the public procurement markets in their countries and be able to grow both domestically but also regionally. And that it is for that we'll also need to focus on making sure that they formalize, because recent studies would show that there's a lot of resistance in terms of financing SMEs, and obviously access is an important point. So once we build up their capacity, expand their reach to international, continental markets, then the point of trade financing would be just a matter of putting these together. And from ourselves, where we see the greatest potential is in our ability as commercial banks to be leveraging on larger corporates, be it the regional conglomerates that we have in the African continent, to basically put in place the right products, be it ENCO-based trade supply chain financing, where we would basically leverage on the credit or payment risk that on the client to basically help the suppliers that being the SME to be accessing those financing. So the ability to really reduce the information asymmetry between the SME and the broader markets out there is key. Then the ability or our ability as a commercial bank to help really put together the right instruments to help give access to those SMEs the right financing to produce and improve their own production capacity would be key. We've mentioned, for example, the commodity space. If you look at the cotton value chain between Mali, Burkina Faso, even Senegal, Benin being the largest producer, you'd be surprised to see that still there's no textile industry. So the ability of these governments to be looking at the broader pie, we're looking at 1.2, 1.3 billion people as a market, So looking at those regional value chain and have, for example, one industry that would be the textile side, that would be able to aggregate those cotton production within the region would be obviously key. And that would be broadening basically the scale and the pie for the SMEs. And that same example can be used for cocoa, with the chocolate industry, where we've been chasing to be getting some living income differential, while, some focus between Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire could have basically make sure that we have some sort of chocolate industry, maybe not reach the Hershey's level, but at least some sort of intermediary product that would ensure we add enough value, because that's really where the gist of the advantage of the AfCFTA is, to be really helping the SMEs growing and basically climbing the ladder in terms of the value chains in the various sectors.
So I guess we're still building on this theme that we need some infrastructure across the continent. That's not just about road and rail, but it is actually about processing capacity and maybe grouping, almost like cooperatives, but between countries as a means. So, but where does that leave, though, perhaps the informal sector? Because, different statistics will tell you that relies, or rather accounts for a far larger portion than perhaps the formal sector does in certain areas. How would you bring the informal sector in, do you think?
No, I think in that space we need to do the right advocacy. We know that from a fiscal perspective, a lot of the informal sectors, first of all, may not know in terms of having a window where they could come and just have a VAT ID in some of the places. You know that there's this inability to be understanding the advantage of formalizing, because the idea would be let's just trade, but the formalization would help us as commercial bank to be really help financing those products. So in my view, they should be the same way we have the AfCFTA, and I know that there's a process where there would be some IDs. Registration for exporters or importers in both ends of the trades to be formalizing. But the governments in each of these markets should be really making it a point to really ensure that there's this incentive given to SMEs to formalize. One case in point that I could give is that a government could basically have an initiative to say that there would be some, market, let's say, to supply furniture to government buildings, to SMEs, and give as an incentive that in order to access that market, you need to register. And the other incentive is obviously what is the impediment in terms of registration? It's also the fear that there would be income taxes or some, additional burden in terms of administrative process. So there should be a clear path for these SMEs that is given by the government to say that if you register today, you have, let's say, a 5-year or even 10-year moratorium on any tax payment. Because we know that there's also a very high percentage or probability of, initial companies to be fading away in 2-3 years. So it's going to be important to have a really medium-term view and have the right focus by this government to formalize the sector and help us as commercial banks to be really leveraging on very clear paths in terms of our KYC. Because it's very tough if you're looking at 3 years financials or looking at account throughputs in terms of historical payments, and that's going to be key. What we've done in Ecobank is at least we've been able to create an account that we call Express account, which is a free account. So at least it helps put these SMEs in the banking sector That would then allow us to start looking at, what is the historical flow in order to improve the finance. The second part that we've done is the focus on the women. We know that, most SMEs, 50% or more, are led by women, and most of these are in trade. And we've put together as well a special offering that we call Elevate. And it's actually to the point, as we are in the Women's International Women's Week, to be really helping these women-led business have access to financing and just basic banking services at the very low cost, which would, we hope, help them, formalize first and then really drive the access, leveraging on what I've mentioned before, which is these digital marketplaces, which allows, through our partnership with companies like FruitoWave, iPay, etc., to really have the ability to showcase their products and have, digital payments from the comfort of their offices. Thank you.
Thank you. Did you have any comments on the sort of informal sector and using the, this new scheme or this new cooperation?
So I think more generally, as economies advance, they capture more of the informal sector. There has to be an advantage of informal moving into formal, right? Because once you come into the formal sector, you capture it into a tax net. There needs to be some perception of benefit. As economies grow and as they advance, you capture more of the informal sector. And actually, you slow down the growth of the informal sector as you grow. Because it's just easier to work within an already set up infrastructure as opposed to having to do a lot of things on your own, right? I'm more on the corporate side, but I can sense, if I look at the Japanese kairetsu system, where you'd have a large manufacturer actually relying on multiple small entities. So if you're manufacturing a car, you'd get somebody supplying you a small component for the dashboard. Or so. And perhaps that's something for us to look at in terms of how do you leverage off large corporates using smaller entities that may not necessarily be involved in cross-border trade, but if you're manufacturing a car in South Africa, can we get the leather from Botswana? Can we get some other plastic components from a manufacturing entity, a little bit far out? Clearly the trick will be, can you do it cost effectively?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So, Souleymane, one of the things you talked about just now was operating the bank accounts. So how do you see the PAPSS system aiding in this process?
That's a great achievement, really, and we need to commend African Bank for having really led that initiative. Know that basically this Pan-African payment and settlement system is basically addressing one of the key components of the trade financing drawbacks, which is the cost of payments between the buyers and sellers. And more often we've seen the cost of that because typically a bank in the supplier's market would be leveraging on a correspondent bank to be either getting payment or from a buyer's side be making payment to the supplier. So these cross-currency moves are obviously very costly and also time-consuming on top of the administrative burden. Because obviously a lot of central bank have also put some requirements in terms of regulation, in terms of FX transfer. So what the PAPSS system is doing is basically cutting the middleman in this case, the third currency or the correspondent banks, and being able to leverage on the regional settlement platforms or even the national settlement platform to ensure that the payments are done based on local currency. And then later on, the settlement on a net basis. So that's really critical, and it's a great achievement in allowing speediness that is required, the confidence, because PAPSS is also creating this ability to have the, African obviously making it a point to guarantee that these payments are actually processed to the end, making sure that there's this ability to just make instant payments, which we're looking at, obviously intraday, something around 1 or 2 seconds, 2 minutes, to make sure that these payments arrive on time and on a costly effective manner.
Do you have any statistics as to how, what proportion of payments are going through this system now, and what is AfCFTA's sort of aspirations in terms of the volume going forward over what sort of time horizon, so that people understand how important this could become going forward?
I do not have specific statistics, but we know that in the West African monetary zone, covering Ghana, Nigeria, Sierra Leone, and the likes, this system is now fully live because this is where it was piloted. The ambition is that the PAPSS would now aggregate and onboard all the regional system. And answering your question onto what is the ambition is that 100% of intra-country payments related transaction would be done through this platform. Now that is the ambition, and I'm sure that because this local currency settlement are a very good ambition, in my view, if we arrive at 50% on a medium-term perspective, on a medium-term scale, that would be a great achievement.
And what's the medium-term scale? 5 years?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay, I think I'm coming to my last question, which I'm going to ask both of you, but what do you see are the current challenges of the AfCFTA? I still can't get that right, can I?
AfCFTA.
That's the one.
So I think I would break it down into 3 key themes. There are financial challenges, particularly for small markets that have to forego tariffs and that do have some concessions in terms of an extended timeline to forego those tariffs. The South African Customs Union is a clear example of this. Countries like Lesotho and Swaziland rely heavily on customs and excise duties. And a number of other countries sort of north of the Limpopo would have similar challenges. But I don't think the tariff challenges are as large or as serious as the non-tariff barriers. So, coming out of 2 years of essentially COVID-ravaged economies, commodity prices with volatility sort of all over the place, I think the challenge is how do countries then go to their local populations and say, well, we're going to give up a little bit now so that we can have a lot more later on. And we've seen in some of the markets, nationalist policies take place where you've got protection of jobs or specific industries and the like. And one of the key principles of the AfCFTA, albeit in phase 2, is around free movement of people. How do you get goods to move, right? If you're manufacturing vehicles in South Africa and you need to get these vehicles to Kenya, how do you get it through a port, onto a ship, back into Kenya? So some of these are the more structural issues. I'm a fan of rail, both people and freight, and if we can get that right on a continent, then I believe that's a long way to go. But these agreements may be executed in years, so that's the time scale. But to come to full fruition, it's a decades-long vision, right? And some of it is fragile, as Brexit has taught us when we look at the EU example. So as time goes, and if we're talking about a decades-wide implementation, how do we maintain the impetus and the urgency to understand that this actually, in terms of rolling out AfCFTA, is a good thing for the continent? Because individual countries, a key part of the AfCFTA is that if individual countries have to drive their own growth, it's a lot harder than if you do it as a collective, right? And if we understand that at some point, all natural resources are finite. And if we look to where the world is going, eventually some of the natural resources we have may not, coal and some of the others are going to disappear. So clearly copper is an important one, cobalt's an important one for electric vehicles and the like. But if we can move some of that beneficiation efficiently and at proper scale on the continent, then we will drive intra-Africa growth, but then we also drive growth of outside of Africa trade. But I think to summarize the key challenges, some are tariffs, small. The non-tariff barriers in terms of logistics are large. And then there are some structural barriers that we need to overcome in terms of how do you develop industry on the continent.
Souleymane, coming to you, where do you see the challenges going forward? Are they the same or are they different?
Yeah, pretty much the same. I think the AfCFTA did address the tariff barriers. Now, you touched on it at the beginning, we certainly need to continue to develop the infrastructure to allow trade to be smooth, but also in the trade facilitation, being the customs, making sure, in terms of phytosanitary requirements, there's alignment to ensure that, beyond just, the tariffs, we actually enable an environment that will foster intra-African trade. So there's obviously good progress being made. I'm sitting in Lomé currently, and I'm looking at the road going from Lomé to Ghana and going on the other side to Benin and Cotonou, and that same road arrives in Nigeria. So it's not only an infrastructural point, it's really for us to ensure that in terms of trade facilitation, we make sure that in terms of documentation, customs clearance, we are actually upping the game in terms of processing and timely processing. The other point is obviously ensuring that by focusing on the continental trade, we ensure we attract enough foreign direct investment. The gist of the AfCFTA is also to make the continent very attractive to foreign investors. And it's going to be important that the governments continue to make sure that the business environment are conducive to foreign direct investments. And obviously the market is there. There should be a very clear focus on ensuring that we have these foreign direct investments and building capacity. And last, I would say, once we cover the point on non-tariff barriers, the AfCFTA, the infrastructure is obviously for us as commercial bank to be covering the trade finance gap. And in that perspective, we need to continue focusing on the right target market, which, as we said, are SMEs, ensuring that we provide effective payment system, and from a trade instrument perspective, we have cost-effective instruments. And on the advocacy side, I think we still need to make sure that the government see the potential that the SMEs in the countries have and put together the right framework for those SMEs to thrive, so that we can collectively across the continent, make this AfCFTA the great event that it has been for the last 1 year. Thank you.
If I may, I'll just add one more thing, which is, I think all of the countries that are party to this, one of the things that would help with trade finance is perhaps having a more streamlined process around registration of collateral. A lot of SMEs, they don't have bricks and mortar collateral or land, but they do obviously have the goods that are being financed. And some countries, the taxes, the stamp duties become prohibitive for either a lender to bear or indeed the borrower to bear. So I think that's something also that some of the countries and their regulatory authorities could look into to assist in stimulating the financing of these trades and these SMEs. We'll bring our session to a close. I don't know whether we actually have time for any questions, or if there are any questions from the floor for our two panelists. There's a gentleman over there.
Good day, it's Bobby from FNB, from Trade and Structured Trade Finance. I think one of the things, Shaahien, you mentioned about the movement of people. What do you foresee as far as manufacturing is concerned on the continent? From a manufacturing perspective, how do you see that cross-polarization into the continent? Because there's quite a bit of expertise in Egypt, there's quite a bit of expertise in South Africa. But in the remainder of the countries in Africa, we don't see that large-scale industrialization. What do you see the uptake of industrialization going into the future in Africa?
So I think a key constraint is around power, right? How do you move from light industrial to heavy industrial? But I wouldn't underestimate the capability of companies to operate in markets where they can operate. So you're right, there's manufacturing capability in Egypt and in South Africa, but I think over time that will expand. And this is why I made the point, is that when we talk about trade finance, essentially before you can trade the goods, somebody has to manufacture the goods. Insofar as it's about movement of people, for me that's more around the service sector as opposed to goods. So if you have growth in technology, healthcare, financial services, how do you get, if we have, for example, a particular skill set that is based in Nigeria and we want the person employed in South Africa, right now you have to go through a pretty onerous visa process. How do we get to the point in time where you can have that sort of free movement of people? And admittedly, some of the challenge now is that there are 55 distinct countries growing at different rates with different strengths and different challenges, right? We've seen, again alluded to in earlier talks, in difficult times, countries tend to contract, they tend to close their borders. So I think the one aspect around free movement of people is distinct. Around industrialization, it comes down to how do we actually say we're going to fulfill a need or incentivize companies to set up factories to fulfill needs in a manner that is sustainable. The entity I spoke about earlier, I was fascinated by when I visited one of the factories in Zambia. You wouldn't expect this. It's a family-owned business that is a $200 million business. Right? And they export, they don't just manufacture for Zambia, they export into DRC, into Angola and others. And I'm certain that there are other examples of that in other parts of the continent. So I think there needs to be incentive for investment into industrialization. There needs to be an understanding of what does this mean. You know, how do you move then where the world is putting pressure on carbon-intensive industries, notwithstanding the just transition? How do we find the investment then for industry that may be power hungry at this point in time, drawing power from coal-fired power stations as opposed to moving to more renewables? But ultimately it comes down to, are there sufficient people on the ground with the will to do this?
I think movement of people is always a difficult topic.
Yeah.
You know, and certainly as a Brit, it was something that definitely led to the vote for Brexit. I think, you know, the economic side of it was not really paramount in most of the population's views. It was about the movement of people and what was felt to be a negative impact of the vast movement of people from the expanded EU that all seemed to head to almost the northern point of the EU. And so movement of people and having free movement of people has benefits, but there are challenges for it in terms of social issues, etc. I think we're being pressed to bring our session to a close. Thank you everybody for your attention, and thank you both to our two interviewees for their thoughts on this initiative. Thank you very much.
Thanks.